No
All right,
pressure.
can we take another take now?
No pressure.
All right, good morning. So for those who don't necessarily know me, I'm Sean Maloon. I've been modeling since I was 5 years old. Did kits like Caleb showed us this morning in show and tell. Most of what I have done is plastic modeling most of my life. When I was about 12 years old, got an opportunity. I'm from Maine, by the way, and I grew up on the East Coast and got an opportunity. My stepdad had a sailboat. We sailed around down East Harbor, and we went to Bahama and uh, saw the Queenie 2 come in, and we sailed around her for the whole weekend. And I went back, stole a bunch of 2x6s and 12s from my stepdad, took out the saw, and built a replica of the Queenie 2 that was probably as big as I was. Took it out. We grew up on a lake. I took it out, put it in the lake, and it immediately sank. So I thought, well, I need to do like the dock and put floats underneath it. So I put some styrofoam on it, took it out, put it back in the lake, and it immediately turned a turtle. And learned quickly about metacentric heights, and that I had way too much top hamper and a lot of, with the styrofoam on the bottom, too much light on the bottom, and it just would not sit right. And I didn't learn that until I went to school much later, but then kind of realized what it was. But that was my first foray into wood ship building. I have been doing it a little bit off and on. Still do a lot of plastic modeling. I still enjoy that, but I do like scratch building. I brought in some examples, the North Carolina battleship that I built, still building, and some West Virginia hulls that I'm still also contemplating. But this is my second hull for sticks and strings. My first one, which was a really good learning curve, was Siren. The hull is done. I'm still doing the interior stuff, the fittings, the guns, and so forth. But it was a really good lesson. And I had seen when Chelsea on Siren's website, fell in love with it, wanted to do it. In a conversation with Warren 2 years ago, he told me he had some frames that he'd be willing to give me, and that started this journey. This is literally my second plank on frame, where I wanted to actually show the frame or the planking. And I'm going to kind of show you what I learned on Siren and what I incorporated here in the One Chelsea model. If you could go to the PowerPoint slide, if you would, please. So if you would go to, do you have a clicker?
Yeah.
Okay. So in learning the process, I did a lot of online research, and Chuck Pizarro has 4 videos. I've given links here on the presentation that walks you through how you set up the hull to be able to accept planking, how you calculate how many rows of planking you need, how you essentially shape each plank to the hull. I can't replicate the really good work that he does in those videos. So I'm not going to necessarily try. I'm just going to show you some of the techniques that I have done to get where I'm at. And again, I'm no expert at this. This is just simply the techniques that I've used in the course of my model. Also on the NRG website, there's a bunch of references. Somebody mentioned about planking fan. There's a PDF copy of the planking fan in there that I used on Siren. I did not have to do that for Winchelsea. The Winchelsea is a Chuck Pizarro kit, and he already provided the details on how to lay out each of the rows of planking on there. But this is an extremely good reference area. And then I have a series of books that I'm constantly in. They're dog-eared. I wanted to change my model a little bit over what Chuck had on his piece. I wanted to do the whales just as the ship was built. You can't see it because of the paint, but I did do a hook and anchor version of the whales, full thickness. I didn't do 2 layers. I did it full thickness. I just wanted to see if I could actually do it, and I was actually pretty happy with the outcome. That's
John,
yes.
we are not seeing the only page that I'm seeing online here is lower hull planking, your very first page. As you click through your presentation, they are not showing up on Zoom.
I'll have to blame the IT person.
I'll in turn pass the buck on to Zoom.
That's
So while he's trying to bring that up, so these books, the first one, Peter Goodwin's book, literally takes you through the construction process of an English ship of war. From the keel design, there's formulas throughout, which really sort of resonates with me as an engineer. Just love how purpose, calculations, wood type, all kind of go into what is a ship of war, and it talks about all the different planking sizes and so forth. And then the Swan class books from Sea-Watch. I have all 4 right now because of where I'm in the construction, volume 1 and 2. Again, they're dog-eared. I'm going through a lot of what I've learned technique-wise, as well as the design comes from those books as well as the videos that I showed. But these are all really great reference material.
Rylan, are you seeing the slides now?
Yes, it's I am seeing the slides.
Okay, very good.
So this picture sort of is a replication of what I have here on the table. I'm going to walk through live demo kind of the tools that I'm using. I originally was just going to kind of just briefly talk and really get into the planking technique, but based on last month's minutes and the interest in the homemade arm that John had done that he loaned to me, I decided I'd spend most of my talk talking about the technique and the tools that I'm using than actually sitting there and planking. As you can tell from my haul, I have finished the plank. I laid the last one in last week, so my whiskey plank is in. For me, it was a rum plank. I celebrated with a glass of rum. But I'm going to show more of the tools, a little bit of technique on what I do. But the videos will really show you the big thing. So I'm going to skip across the tools. My tools are not very expensive. I only have 2 very expensive tools that I used in the process of planking my hull. The power arm that's in the centerpiece, actually it's not on that one, sorry. In the center here that my hull is sitting on is probably my most expensive piece. I use that in all my shipbuilding models, whether I use it here on the Winchelsea or the Siren to plank the hull, or when I had the solid hull for the West Virginia, I had it mounted in here in a different setup, but it was allowing me to carve the hull based on that. But the power arm is the most, and I'll demonstrate that here shortly. My second most expensive is my disc sander. The disc sander for me was, and I did not bring that, to me that was extremely important because it allowed to give really good tight butt joints, whether I had a perfect 90 butt joint or I had an angle, depending on where I was in the hull. To me, the disc sander is an invaluable tool because trying to do it by hand, no matter how careful I took it, I had rounding a little bit, and I could never actually get the butt joint to be perfect. So the disc sander, by all means, does that, and it really kind of changed the scope of how I was planking. Then, got questions in the past about what type of glue I used. I do use the Type Bond 3. And I'm going to show you the very, very last slide that I have here in the slide deck. I like the Type Bond because with a little bit of white vinegar, it'll dissolve the glue joint. And I can repair. And in fact, last night I was sanding the hull, and I found that I sanded one of the planks way too thin, and decided I didn't like how that looked. So sat there with some vinegar, removed the plank, did up a new one, glued it into place, and it was very quick. That didn't take long to have to repair. So I like using Type Bond. If you look at the videos, Chuck says that in his construction he uses, and this is the only place he uses CA, but he uses CA to do his planking. For me, because I got big chunky hands and I tend to destroy more than I create, I want the ability, as John mentioned in one of his talks, the ability to take it apart and redo if you need to. I like the ability just using wood glue to be able to take it apart. So I use the Type Bond. In the upper corner, the plank cutter, I got that in an auction last year. Before then, I did mostly by hand. I still do a lot by hand, but when I got that, it was a time saver because I could be able to take away plank material very quickly to get towards the taper that I wanted. So that has been extremely helpful since I got that in the auction. You'll see some of my my forms of clamping. I did not bring the smaller ones, but they're just basically dress pins with a collet on it that you can tighten to a certain depth. I like using those because they don't damage the frame. I can push them in real tight and get a really quick clamp while I'm allowing the glue to dry. There's some twist type ones up there. I do use those in some instances where I need a tight grip, but I don't like using them very often because they will destroy the frame if you're not careful. Down here in the lower, some more examples of the various clamps. You can't have too many clamps. I'm going to walk through some of the ones that I brought today when I go live, but I have tons and tons of clamps that I use in just to get into being able to hold a plank in place while I'm waiting for the glue. And I have a slide in here that shows an improvised plank. And then in the lower corner, which I will demonstrate here shortly, is my method of plank bending. It comes from Chuck. And I used various methods before I found his video on it. I used, just soaking in water and then setting it in a form and allowing it to dry several days in the form, to using the solder and iron type version. That particular one got to be kind of dangerous because the longer it sat heating, it started to interact with the handle and it would get kind of wonky. And I kind of stepped away from that. The iron gives me all of that capability and better control, I felt.
You're wetting the wood before you iron it?
I will demonstrate that. Okay, so some of the techniques for hull planking, I'm going to jump over this really quick because like I said, I kind of changed my presentation a little bit from trying to show the actual planking techniques because the videos do a really good job. But I'll just touch on a couple, things here. You got the planking fan. Again, how you can measure out, these come from his videos, how you measure to get the number of planks and then laying it out on the planking fan so that you get the correct number. And then you stay with that number and go through the planking fan for each piece.
Can you go back to the fan just for a moment? Prior incarnation of the website, we had one of these you could just download. I don't think it made it version, but I can add it back so anyone can just.
I did use
Download
that
it, right?
one back on Siren, so it was there before COVID. So
Yeah, okay.
So the one piece that's sort of slight difference, my technique is once you have all your lines in place on each frame that represents where the plank will sit and the thickness, I use tape. Chuck also uses tape, but he didn't do every single one. He did like every 5 or so, I think is how his videos did. I chose to do every one because I found that, depending on how well I fared the hull, I might have a slight variation. And so it's just basically line tape that you can use for painting. I ran the tape across each one and spent several days, and that's why there's some dress pins in holding it because the tape started to give away over time. But kind of really just making sure that I had a sequence of lines along the hull that I was comfortable with and I felt like gave a good sweep. Once I was comfortable with that, I modified the tick marks I made on each frame and put in a darker, heavier line so that I could imprint where I wanted that plank to sit. And then from there, so you can see I did it on both sides. I then went in and the rules for planking, if you're going to have a butt joint on an adjacent row of planking, it needs to be at least 5 feet. This all comes from Goodwin's book. So I had to make sure as I laid the butt joints out where I wanted to have them, and I pre-planned that before I put the first plank on. And then, no butt can be in the same frame within 3 rows of the preceding one. And then if you have it across two planks, it shouldn't be within 4 feet. So I had to sit there and quite a bit of planning, and I'd have to erase every once in a while when I realized that I wasn't following the rule until I got to a point where I did have, and you'll see here, somebody had asked me a while ago in a show and tell what the X's meant. That X is where I intend to put a butt joint on that row of planking. And then the red lines are, I divided from the whales to the keel, I divided it into 4 bands, and I worked in a band to make sure a couple things. One, it kind of gave me a sense of accomplishment as I finished a band, but also I could look at it from starboard to port and make sure that my rows were lining up on either side of the stem and keel because I wanted symmetry on both sides. So working bands allowed me to go do that. And you can see here some of the clamping. Again, a lot of clamps, a lot of different ways to try to get them in. This is sort of, again, the technique. I'll kind of walk through real quick because it'll show how I form the planks. So here you can see on step 2, I have a blank plank that I've laid across. This is one of my repair pieces. I laid the plank across, and you can see I've lightly marked on that plank where each frame crosses. And then and you can see I've done the same thing on the other side. Similar method a little bit further in my planking. And then from there, I'll take a piece of scrap wood and I'll just mark the thickness or the depth of the plank on that frame at that spot and transfer that to the actual piece that I intend to do. And I'll do that for each frame until I have my blank with how that thickness of the plank or the width of the plank is as it shows up across each of the frames. And then from there, so these are 2 examples of 2 different planks where I marked out their thickness. I'll sit there and either use sandpaper and sand down to the line if there's not a much to take off, or I'll use the plank tapering jig and plane to do it, or I'll show to what you mentioned, Amazon finds. I have a sanding block that I found on Amazon that I really, really like, and I'll show that here shortly live. And then I'll jump into, you know, how I actually form the plank, if there's any kind of bend or curvature to the plank. I'll use my technique and bend the plank into place so that I can then put it on the model. So you can see here where I've added them to the model again. And then this is here my improvised clamping jig on the bow and a repair piece. I needed it to lay flat. It didn't get it quite to lay flat, so I used rubber bands and a dowel to hold it in place. And then again, I had a serious repair job to do on the stern, and the white vinegar works really, really, really well in dissolving the glue and being able to take it apart. I'm ready to switch over to live. All right, so wanted to demonstrate first off, so there was a lot of interest in John's
I'm seeing it live.
the room is not seeing it.
There we go.
Okay, so if you don't mind, I'm just going to take apart yours and show what your piece is. So he has a block of wood, some pipe fitting material to make the stem, and then the Amante heel clamp. I really like the Amante clear clamp. You'll see I have it on my arm, but essentially it's the ball from the Amante, the clamp, some washers that provide a seat for the ball to rest against, and then a block of wood that's set inside the piece. The one piece that I find I don't use this when I'm clamping and actually working on this model, only because that particular model is a lot heavier, and the block is not big enough, you know, to give me a stability point, but it's great for transporting it back and forth from the house to here. But, you know, you can
give me a bigger piece of wood on that.
is that the renter fee? But you can, you know, you can change it by just changing the area. It does have a slightly less angle capability than what the actual power arm. John turned me on to this many years ago. I think I've had this now for, gosh, I want to say at least 15 years, maybe. I got this one on eBay. This part is not part of what came, but it was in pretty rough shape. I tore it apart, cleaned it all up. But what I like about it is, you know, I can get all kinds of different angles on it. I can change it. I can go down sideways. So if I'm sitting here and I'm working on my hull, it's right there in front of me. I can work on it. I can get any kind of angle in to be able to get into where I want to be. And then when I lock it down, it's there. It's not moving. And I have a large base, so it gives me a lot of stability working on a large model like this. But I found, like, you know, carving the West Virginia or planking the hull of the North Carolina, it gave me a lot of ability to move around. And then I used it. You can see I got resin when I fiberglassed the hulls. It was great. I could get into the angle I needed to lay down the fiberglass mat. For this particular project, I added a small angle, aluminum angle with the Amante clamp. I modified it so I can mount it to the angle. And you can see the actual heel clamps there on the center bulkhead that I can then just flip it and work it as the picture showed. But to me, this is like one of my most valuable tools in doing the woodworking, because it gives me a firm base. I can move it any which way I want to be able to get to the angle I worked on.
Once you use one of those, carving or anything, you'll never go back.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
What did you call that?
It's a power arm.
Our,
Power arm.
hey, buddy, Wilton.
Wilton.
Device people.
If you want to spend some money on a tool, I can't highly recommend this and the disc sander. But what you're going to see in front of me today is these are the tools that I did to plank this. I didn't use anything else. I have a lot of other tools that I use to mill the lumber and stuff like that. But if you're looking for, something to just be able to do a good planking job or a good carving job that John does, these are the kind of the same tools you would use. And I can't speak enough of the power arm because but you can also get wooden ones. There's wooden ones that are out there. For me, I didn't like the Amante base. No matter how much I tightened up on that, I could not get it to stay stable. The weight of the model just kept wanting it to tip over. This holds it pretty solid. Sanding, whether it's a plank on frame or a solid hull carving, I use a lot of different sandpaper. For me, I like just taking sticks of scrap wood and either CAing or using a spray adhesive to glue on sandpaper. I use these all the time, and then when they're done, I can either try to scrape off the sandpaper or throw it away and use another one. This one you can see is pretty much used pretty extensively. I liked this because and you can see it's sort of worn away now, but it used to be perfectly flat, angled piece. I created this when I was doing the siren because I needed some way to be able to get inside the bulwarks to sand down to the proper thickness, and I couldn't quite figure out a good way of doing it. So I used this, but then I ended up using this as well on the Winchelsea, in that when I have a plank sitting on the frame, I had any glue residue, or I wanted, if I had two pieces coming together like this, and they weren't quite level, I had a little bit of a gap and the next plank wouldn't sit well, I could take this because it had the nice sharp taper to it. I could get in there, sand a little bit until they got to they were level, and my other adjoining plank would then sit tight. I found this to be incredibly valuable in doing it that way than trying to run a file or something that would tend to move on me and maybe scar up the planks, not the way I intended. So obviously I'll have to build a new one of these for my next model because this is worn down. But just making sandpaper out of scrap wood, this is one I made about 25, maybe almost 30 years ago, a wood dowel that I use this mainly for fairing the hull, and then like up in here where you have the tumble home, I use this. I can change out the different sandpaper. You saw in my last picture there of clamping. I have a smaller one that I made, but again, my sandpaper can just sit in here. It's just a bolt that's recessed into the dowel. And then I can put the dowel, this back in. I just used an X-Acto saw and carved it to get what I wanted. And then, I can sit there and I can sand along there, change out the different sandpaper for the, I use 80 grit to fair the hull, and then down to 220 for sanding. I found last year I bought myself a spindle sander, and I found that just the sleeves work really well as well, because then I can change the profile a little bit if I needed to, and they're stiff enough for a light sanding to contour. I'm using these right now to kind of sand down the planking to get everything smooth. Don't typically need to use the spindle rubber dowel. Just doing it this way works really, really well to get everything sanded down smooth. And then my Amazon find, this showed up on, I didn't even search for it. It just happened to show, hey, you might be interested in this. And I was, so I bought it. I think I don't know, I think I spent maybe $19 or something like that on it. But it's a just a sanding block that you can. It's got different contours. You got the rounded side, you got the flat. I use this almost exclusively to take the edge off on a plank before I lay it. And these are knife blade belt sander pieces. So you can get these anywhere on Amazon or eBay that just sit into the thing. I got it cranked up so I can't get it on. But this has become a very valuable tool in my sanding arsenal because I can swap out. I have all the way up to 800 grit sandpaper, and I can sit there and I can sand really quickly to contour, or if I, like I said, have a slight curve to it, I can use this. It gives me control, and I can sit there and I can sand it down. And then equally on the flat portions of my model, I can also use that to get the planks to sit flat. Let's see.
You have that in your Amazon Word history? Is there a link to it, or?
I don't know if I do or not. To be honest, I'd have to look. Yeah, GANWEI. But it works really, really well. Some of the other things, so I talked about on the whales that I did the hook or the button anchor for this particular model. I did a hook type attachment on the siren. But what I did to lay it all out is I made templates out of styrene of what that would look like, and then that would essentially make up a row. And I added a flange to it so that I could take a piece of planking material and I could lay it and then run of course this isn't thick enough, but I could then trace the outline of what that plank should look like for the whale, cut it out, bend it, and then lay it into place. So templates for me worked really, really well for where I had a complex shape to go do. So I used these templates. So, and again, the planking, this was really, really good because I could set this at any angle and then run my plane across it to be able to shape it. If I had a pretty significant amount to take off, this made that a lot quicker than just sitting there with sandpaper and trying to do it. Clamping, this I actually got off of our website. It's just basically a bull clip, sacrifice one to make two. I like these because they are they clamp onto the frame really, really well. And then when you place the handle of the sacrificed one in there, when you place it on the frame, this overlaps the plank and it holds it tight to the frame, and I can go in at any angle. So when you have very little of the field lay, this works really well. Once you get it closed up, it doesn't fit in there anymore. And so the smaller clamps are the dressmaker pins with the collet is a great way of holding that in. I use these as well. I got these at auction last year. I use these to hold. I may use a scrap wood, lay it across the plank, and then hold this against the frame with the scrap wood to hold it into place. But I got tons of these. I really like using these as well. And then these I picked up a while back at Sears before they closed. I like the long throat. I found them on eBay during COVID, and I bought every one I could find on eBay. So I have because they don't last for very long. The rubber piece tends to fall away. But I like them because then you can come in here on the upper bulwarks and you can clamp the piece in and hold it into place very, very well for that piece. Is there a question?
So one of the things I did with the binder clip like you had, instead of sacrificing another one, I just use the binder clip. I take a large paper clip and put down on it, and it does the same thing. It still holds that on the plank really well. So, it's a lot easier to do than trying to get that in the right width and get it in there.
I never thought of the paper clip. That's a good idea. Okay, so that's what I have for that end of it. So my next piece would be to kind of show the technique for bending a plank. Actually going a lot faster than I thought I would be. So I originally, as I talked about when I built Siren, I would soak the planks in water for an hour or so.
Iron grip.
And then once they were pliable with the water, I would then put them inside a form like this and put the reverse part of the form in place and then clamp it and let it dry for several days to get the shape that I wanted. But it's still one-dimensional bending, and I would still have to try to do manipulation by force to get them to lay into the curve at where it needed to lay on my layout. So when I saw Chuck's video, I decided to try that, and I found that it worked incredibly well. I still use my forms because I can get the three-dimensional bend that I want, but it works really well. So my iron is hot. I'm going to, this is again how I do it. Just a couple scrap woods to create where I want my template to go. And then I'll take this plank here. So here's a plank I've tapered to what I want. I'll take a little bit of water, just a wetted finger. I'll wet my plank, and I'll set it in my jig. So I'm going to start my curve at the front, and careful not to burn myself. I will simply just lay the iron, and as it starts to heat the wood, I'll start to put pressure and bend in the direction that I want my plank to bend. And I'll just sit there until I have achieved what I want, and I'll dry it. And there I start getting my bend. And then I can.
Is that a steam iron you're using?
It's a travel iron that I got at Walmart for, I think, $15, $16. In fact, I snuck it into the grocery bill. So I didn't even have to take it from my wife's, the allowance my wife gives me.
What is it?
It is a steam iron, but I don't use the steam part. I'm just using a wetted finger. I tried the steam part of it, and I didn't feel like I was getting what I needed enough from a moisture perspective. Again, I can start, get more of a bend.
What kind of piece of wood is that?
This is maple, but I have done it in basswood as well. But as you know, my wood of choice right now is maple because I can hit and I don't quite destroy my model by being clumsy.
I have a question here.
Yes.
I know there's at least one or two of you have steam. Anybody try bending stuff with the steam? Steam, what do you call it? I mean, that works well, doesn't it?
Steam-box?
Yes, steam.
Yes, near as fast as this to help. Yeah.
No, it's not that fast. But theoretically, you should be able to make a tighter bend.
Depends on the wood, depends on the, like, if you steam it, a lot of factors. Cross section of the wood, side.
So you can see I can get pretty much pretty tight curve, on what I want. So now I have a plank that I, can lay right in, right? And then So I have my dimension here, but I also now need this way, right? And so I'll use this one again. I'll wet both sides just to make sure that the fibers are a little wet. And then I will just sit there. This part takes a little bit more to get the bend. The biggest piece is to stay patient with this part. I have this particular piece was my first attempt to fill in a plank I replaced last night. I got too impatient and I snapped the very tip of it off, and had to do it again. And I had to do it like 2 or 3 times till I got the plank I was happy with. Because again, I was just too impatient. You really want to get the heat on it, allow it the heat to generate the bend for you. I was forcing it too much, but now you can see I'm slowly getting the curve I want.
How many times did you burn your finger?
Only once, actually, in the year I've been doing this technique. Now, like in where it comes into the stem, it's a really, really, really tight angle. Same thing with the on the stern where it comes up to the counter. It's also really, really tight. So to do that, I'll add a little more.
You set it on medium heat or high heat or?
It's I think I have it on the highest setting. Yeah, I do. It's on the highest setting.
Because you're impatient.
I'm impatient. So if I want to get that really, really sharp, and this is where I broke several last night. So let's see if I can do this without, I'll just put my iron just on the very tip of it and then slowly raise it up. Do it just incrementally. This is sort of like, the planking pliers that put a crimp in the wood. This is sort of doing it almost the same thing, but it's just using heat to crimp it a little bit and to get you that bend. So you can start seeing now I've got a really, really tight bend.
Why again don't you like the soldering iron technique?
So the soldering iron worked well. It does sort of the same technique, right? I could get into this form better, right? So I got a little bit better curve quicker. The problem was that soldering iron sitting on my desk for a long periods of time, the shaft of it would get so hot, it would start to melt the plastic handle. Horrible design from that perspective. And I was just afraid, spending several hours on my desk doing the planking, that thing would just start to wave all over the place. I was afraid it would come all apart. And next thing I know, I started a fire or burned myself horribly. This, I can leave there for several hours and it's not doing anything.
Well, that's why I use a lady's hair curl. It looks a lot like a soldering iron, but it has several advantages. The diameter is a lot better to chipped curves. It doesn't get too hot. It will never get hot enough to burn anything. Will not sear.
It's a good idea. Yeah, I like that. I'll have to try that. I might be able to get that in the grocery list too.
Off for about 30 minutes, which is an annoyance sometimes when I go to bend it and it's shut itself off. But
I have a soldering iron with a control on it.
yeah, temperature.
So those are good too.
Yeah.
But fabric stores sell a tacking iron that you use on fabric when you use a fabric glue or something like that. A tacking iron is a handle with a small little triangle at the end of it. And it seems to me that will be pretty easy to handle too. My wife has one. I haven't tried it yet.
I don't know if my wife would let me steal hers, but you can see here in just 5 minutes, the curve I've been able to achieve just with the
3 dimensions.
Well, the hair curler was cheaper than your iron. It was only $10.
I like cheaper.
Just please
But
don't tell my
that's-
wife where her curling iron.
Not by
Right.
much, not by much. Tim looks it up, it's $13.44 right now.
What this?
Yeah.
At Walmart? Okay.
At Walmart.
Yeah, okay. So that is my technique. The only thing I didn't show was I do use the chopper piece because again, I can chop a blank plank. I don't use the chopper to get to my finished dimension. I use the disc sander to sand down to my final joint. But the chopper is really good. I have it on my desk. I can sit there and I can chop away to make my blanks before I go. But this is my technique for how I plank. Any questions?
That chopper place is worth its weight in gold. I've used it on a lot of things.
Yeah, I agree. It is a very good tool. I have a couple of them.
I think you made believers out of a lot of people in this room today.
Oh, how thick is your plank? 32nd?
These particular ones are just under an eighth. I can't remember the exact thickness that I milled them down to. But the whales, which again, I use this technique for the whales, they're almost 3/16. So this will go through thick wood. You just got to be patient.
No, they're not 3/16 wide.
The thicker ones are not quite 3/16. It's double this anyway. Whatever this dimension I don't have. So it'd be that. So that thickness there would be what I did, because it's 2 planks thick. But that is, yeah. Again, it's just patience. The ones that I broke, it was just I was trying to rush through it. It was maybe the end of a session, and I wanted to get it done, and I broke it, so it became the next day's session.
It wasn't because you had some grain or anything like that.
I'm sorry, I
It
missed.
wasn't because you had a piece of that grain.
No, it really truly was because I was rushing through it. Putting too much pressure allowed the wood to get dry under heat. The big thing is to keep it, the surface wet to get that steam to work. And like last night, it got dry and brittle, and I snapped them.
I've got a steam box and I can't get it out of the steam box and onto my shaping form quick enough. It stiffens up too quickly. So I don't know if I'll abandon that or just add this, like steam it a bit first.
So yeah, so this is now dry, and I can glue it right now.
No, I meant when I take it out of the steam box and I'm trying to get it into the form to clamp it so it'll hold the shape. It's already cooling off and stiffening up.
Is it? Okay.
So
Yeah. So for me, I liked this because the methods of wetting it and stuff, I had to wait for it to dry. And it could be hours, it could be days before, depending on how much moisture I put into it to get the bend. This, after working it, I can now glue it. I don't have to wait. And one thing that somebody had asked me about show and tell several times ago was, how do I get to show the planks individually? I just use either a number 2 pencil, or in this case, this is a drafting pencil. It's an HB pencil, and I can sit there and darken up the wood and the joint. And then if I do it to both of them when they come together, you get that nice dark line. When I started the Winchelsea project, this was a whole brand new pencil. I forgot to mention it.
I'm sorry.
I am now.
For those of you who are modeling more modern ships than this, one thing I encountered in carving a hull of a warship from the 1930s and 40s is it's much longer, but almost the entire hull has a flare to it. So you have the shape of the hull as it goes through the water, and you also have the flare up, in this case, to the hangar deck. And what I found was, by going into my local hardware store and looking at the PVC fittings, there's a lot of different diameters of fittings where you can take just small pieces and do the same thing Sean did, glue the sandpaper on. And then you can get in for the short distance. You may get a certain curve, then you take the next size. And when you're fairing the hull, you need, in my case, it was something like 4 to 6 different diameters to be able to get the flare as well as the curve of the hull. I have a picture of it I can show you.
That's why I did the same thing. I used
Yep.
PVC, but then discovered these that, again, they're pretty stiff. They're a cloth backing and not cardboard. And so they hold their shape pretty well. And I can use this, and they come in, I just brought 2 sizes, but I have, I think probably 6 or 7 different diameters that I can use and get in there. And I find that because they're forgiving, they're not as rigid as the dowel or PVC. I can contour better. So these are sort of my go-to now, sort of morphed from the what I had with these. But yeah. Any other questions?
All right, thank you, Sean.
Can I show you your PowerPoint?
Excellent presentation.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. This should conclude today's meeting. We will see you next month.
This was, so this doesn't